Hello, everyone. This is Data Talks presented by Dun Bradstreet. I'm your host, George LaRue. I'm a principal consultant for data strategy in the advisory services team here at Dun Bradstreet. In advisory services, our team is dedicated to helping our clients to maximize the value of their relationship with Dun Bradstreet through expert advice and consultation. On Data Talks, I chat each episode with one of the expert advisors at D&B about a topic that consumers of our data and services could use to get more value. Today's guest expert is Dan Wadding. Dan is a data advisor in the data advisory services team, and he's been in this role for 8 years. Dan, tell me a little bit what you do as a data advisor.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, George. I appreciate it. So, as a data advisor, one of my objectives is I manage a portfolio of accounts, and right now I'm managing a portfolio in the financial services industry as well as the insurance industry, and really I act as the subject matter expert, and I work holistically with our technical advisory and analytical solutions, and importantly, I help a lot of our customers optimize their match results and kind of make sure they're getting the true value of the implementation of their solutions.
So how did you end up in this role? Was this something that when you were 8 years old, you said to yourself, this is what I want to do when I grow up?
I was on a strategic initiative from Dun Bradstreet probably about 12 plus years ago, and I saw an opportunity to work on a high-tech firm where it actually had 5 dedicated data advisors on it. And I just thought, wow, this is the biggest customer at Dun& Bradstreet. I could make an impact on this. I could help engage with them, show them the solutions, and optimize the benefits and the value of Dun& Bradstreet. So I left a corporate initiative to go for this. And I've been in this role ever since, so 12 plus years ago. And we've kind of evolved from, we were information consultants, and we've evolved into this data advisory role under new leadership teams, where we partner more closely with our analytical solutions and our technical advisory teams.
Very cool. And as you and I were prepping for this, you had said that you wanted to kind of make sure that you were giving voice to something that's really basic to us here at Dun & Bradstreet and to all of our customers. When I say basic, I don't mean that it's necessarily simple, but it's really fundamental to what we do and how we do it, and that's the DUNS number. So let's start with that, Dan. What exactly is a DUNS number?
The DUNS number, acronyms are acronyms, and we try to eliminate acronyms in our vernacular, right? So DUNS stands for the Data Universal Numbering System. So it's a 9-digit number that D&B assigns to every business location that we've identified that is economically active. Their doors are open, they're conducting business. It's unique, it's persistent, it's been around for a while. It was actually developed in 1963 as Dun & Bradstreet was launching into the digital age of leveraging computer systems for their databases. And the important part is that it's probably leveraged now by almost 90% of the Fortune 500 companies. And it's really the universal standard for business identification.
So when you say that these companies around the world, Fortune 500 companies are using it, what exactly are they using it for? When you say business identification, what does that mean?
They leverage it through our patented matching entity process. We can assign a DUNS number if or let's just say we're bringing it new to our global cloud, right? So if we don't have it, we're going to go through this patented matching technology, and we're going to assign a DUNS number to a business entity. This DUNS number is going to, it's going to interact within their organization of themselves, but other customers are going to leverage that DUNS number of how they can interact with that DUNS number in other organizations. And what I mean by that is they can tie family trees together. They can do all kinds of great things because it is so unique. It's just not some random DUNS numbering system. It's not an AGN. It's not an alternative key. It's truly a unique universal system. And really has 8 key attributes to it. I mean, it's global, it's unique, it's persistent, it's constant, it's non-indicative is probably the most important part. Universal, hierarchical, and foundational. Just want to kind of touch upon each of those real quick. I mean, from a global perspective, it's assigned to businesses in more than 220 countries and territories. So our data cloud covers that massive scope of, I'll call it the business landscape around the world.
Right.
It's unique. So it's assigned to business locations, and they have unique, separate, and distinct business operations. So if you are a branch and you are at a headquarters location, each of those entities are going to receive a DUNS number. And I talked about those orgs, and we can go into that a little bit deeper, but it's persistent, so it stays with that business. It's never reused, never reassigned. It stays with that business, and I hate to use this term, but from cradle to grave, right? Once we find them and they emerge, and we're going to stay with that business until if they cease business operations or they just fade off, and we do not pick up any more signal data on them. It's not indicative. A lot of people believe that those 9 digits mean something. They don't. Those 9 digits don't tell any aspect of the company or to which it's assigned or any other bearing of that business entity. 9 digits are 9 digits. A DUNS number is a DUNS number, is what we always tell. It's universal, so it's really relied on businesses around the world as well as various governmental agencies that require anyone that they're doing business with to come to them with a DUNS number, or they come to Dun & Bradstreet with their data files to obtain a DUNS number. I touched upon this, and it's hierarchical in nature, and what I mean by that is it reveals relationships about how a specific organization is linked into another one of family trees worldwide, right? So you could look at a site DUNS number, it rolls up to a headquarter parent DUNS number, they roll up to a domestic ultimate DUNS number, and ultimately it rolls up to a global ultimate. That ties in how one site tied into all of those other entities respectively from a hierarchical standpoint. And then the last key portion of the DUNS number is it's foundational. As a lot of entities are moving into the master data realm, it's part of their master data strategy to harmonize their data across an enterprise. So in my dealings with companies as they implement their master data strategies with Dun & Bradstreet, some will use it as a dual key, some will use it as the primary key. So it depends on the structure of that business entity and how they view if they have internal keys that are necessary to keep their business alive and well.
Thanks for going through all that. I want to kind of key in on something, because as you went through that list and before you helped elaborate on each of them, you kind of called out non-indicative, and you said that might be the most important one. Can you tell me why you see that as maybe one of the most important of those attributes about the DUNS number?
It is. It's unique to Dun & Bradstreet, and I'll get into the weeds a little bit. Years ago, before we kind of changed when we evolved the DUNS number, there used to be systematic checks in a DUNS number, and this is before the business population really exploded. So we had a finite set of DUNS numbers available in the Dun & Bradstreet DUNS number pool, and we used to leverage what was called a mod 10 check. And what it would do, it would run a mathematical equation, and then it would evolve and check that 9th digit and tell you it was a valid DUNS number. As we began to run out of that pool, we then began to implement a DUNS number of mod 10 plus 5 factor with more mathematical equations to it as well. Business population again booms and explodes. So we've taken those equations away from the general public and stopped kind of touting them, if you will. And we just tout that the 9 digits are truly non-indicative. There's no bearing that if it's a business that's worthy of credit extensions, that's worthy of being a supplier, that they're active or inactive. It's really the key to getting into the Dun & Brad, I call it the goodness, right, that Dun & Bradstreet can provide. And that's whether you need credit information, you need comply information, or basic marketing information, right? Once you have that DUNS number, you can tie and correlate that into all the solution sets that Dun & Bradstreet offers.
So I guess the key thing about it being non-indicative then is that it doesn't tell me anything about the business, just the number itself, but that allows for things to change and for us to be able to reflect that. If I own George's Pizza, that DUNS number is going to stay the same, even as my credit worthiness, even as my phone numbers, even as the ownership changes over time, right?
Exactly. So if you go through a business name change, let's say you move your address, let's say George retires and you bring in a new CEO, or let's say you evolve into new lines of business. The dynamics of that business operation, it will not have a bearing on your DUNS number, and I'm going to caveat that. And my caveat is let's just say, if ABC company merges with XYZ, when the merger, we announce a merger on day one, let's say on day 20, the merger is complete, and we begin to look at those family trees and who's going to survive and who's going where. There are certain times when DUNS numbers will not get changed, but they'll be put to rest, if you will. Let's
Mm-hmm.
just say a branch moves into another, they're consolidating locations. We will begin to consolidate those DUNS numbers. One will survive, but we have behind the scenes audit trails that help all of our customers that if they have that DUNS number of ABC, and let's say it's consolidated into XYZ due to that merger or acquisition, we have audit trails that we offer to our customers that we can point them of the DUNS number of company A to company XYZ.
Yeah, and I know that what we call recertification is something that one of our other colleagues is looking to speak with us on a future episode
Okay.
of this. And so, it just shows how it all ties together and how critical the DUNS number really is to understanding businesses. How many of them, you talked about kind of the explosive growth before, how many exist today?
So within the Dun Bradstreet Data Cloud, there are last count, over 420 million, and that is constantly evolving as different markets start to explode in leveraging different types of data sources and data signals. So the sky's the limit on this. We've grown substantially over the past 5 to 10 years. I remember in my younger years at Dun Bradstreet, we had the big celebration over hitting 100 million DUNS numbers. I was a former global DUNS number administrator at D&B at Dun Bradstreet earlier in my career, and it was interesting to watch the evolution of this, just and the world just growing so much, and the DUNS number staying there as that persistent key. And an interesting note, I will tell you, um, we've done studies with customers to see if we could start providing alternative keys or different numbers. And we did focus groups with them, and we looked at and we would show them side by side the values of each, and the alternative key versus the DUNS number.
Mm.
And 100% of the customers said, "Do not provide us with an alternative key. The value of the DUNS number drives everything home, whether we're dealing with our customers, our suppliers, our potential market prospects." In our own internal systems.
I mean, that's the kind of thing that you want to hear inside Dun and Bradstreet. It's just the value that it
Absolutely.
gives. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
briefly, you kind of alluded to it earlier. Could you talk about how a DUNS number gets assigned? We've seen kind of this explosive growth in the number of DUNS numbers, and so I think that could beg the question: is it because we're changing the way that we assign DUNS numbers, or is it just because the business landscape has grown so much over the course of time?
Not changing the way we're assigning DUNS numbers for sure, but it is the explosive growth in the global landscape. Particularly if we look at the growth over the past, say, 12 months, China has exploded incredibly by millions of additional new sources. So traditionally, they didn't have sources available to them. Now they're bringing in new sources. We leverage our patented matching technology to see if we have those entities. You always got to double check, because the last thing you want to do is put duplicates in your system,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we leverage our matching technology, which is part of the DUNS right process, to see if we have that entity in the cloud, and if not, we'll assign one and add it to that business entity, and now they're resident to our Dun & Bradstreet data cloud, and we begin the Duns right process there, and we begin to track that evolution of a business. We might have picked them up as they're an emerging business, and we begin to monitor all those various data signals as they evolve through their life cycle. Some may quickly come and go, and some may be there for quite some time. Dun & Bradstreet's an example, being around for over 175 plus years.
So is there a way for a company that's just emerging, they're starting to do business, is there a way for a company to raise its hand and say, hey, Dun & Bradstreet, here I am, start tracking me? I mean, I know that there's plenty of places that require a DUNS number to do business with them.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great question. We do have specific teams set up where customers can call in or go through the internet and request a DUNS number on their own business entity. And it's a fairly simple, straightforward process. We're gonna ask questions, we're gonna do a few checks, and we're gonna go through our process to make sure that it's in the cloud, right? And then we're going to go through the evolution of leveraging our DUNS Right process to monitor and always keep an eye on that entity to pick up more signal data, so that the cloud always has the most current and present view of that business entity.
Well, Dan, you talked about wanting to give the DUNS number a voice, and I think that you've done that. If there's people watching or listening and you want to give them just one thing to walk away from this conversation with, what might that be?
The DUNS number is the key to all, as I mentioned, the key to the Dun & Bradstreet data cloud. And that data cloud can serve customers of many use cases. Leverage the DUNS number and its goodness, whether you're building out your own MDM as a unique persistent key, leverage it to obtain information on other companies, leverage it to be able to walk a hierarchical view of family trees. It is one of the most unique identifiers in the business world, I think, that people have seen in a long time, and it's been here for a long time.
So the only last thing I'm going to say to you, Dan, is I think that you should look into trademarking Dun & Bradstreet goodness. I think that has the real opportunity to catch on.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Dan. Our guest expert today has been Dan Wadding, a data advisor at Dun & Bradstreet, and this has been Data Talks. We hope you've enjoyed today's discussion, and if you have, we encourage you to please share it with a friend or a colleague. And if you'd like more information about what we discussed on today's episode, we encourage you to visit www.dnb.com or to talk to your company's D&B specialist today. I'm George LaRue. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.